Hi everyone, and welcome to another Solventure webinar. Now, in today's webinar, our host will talk about segmentation. So I'm very happy to introduce Solventure COO, that's Pieter Bauwens, to you guys. He will guide you through his presentation and also looks forward in receiving your input. So as a practical tip, before I hand over to Pieter, if you have any questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to use the question box in your control panel. Write down your question, share it with us so we can use it in the Q&A at the end of the webinar to answer all your questions. Now let's get started. Pieter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. So let's indeed start. Yeah. So what is the agenda of today? I will briefly mention you a bit who we are as Solventure. That is just one slide. I'll talk about segmentation in terms of a definition. What is it? What different types of segmentation do we have? And what is maybe most applicable now? To make that concrete, I will show you an example, a case, a brief case of one type of segmentation and an end-to-end segmentation. And then I will move towards a specific remarks on segmentation in Corona times, where we will go also to a pragmatic way of segmenting your business and an approach on how to develop that segmentation. Normally, at the end, we expect to still have at least 5 or 10 minutes for some Q&A. So Solventure, who are we? We are actually in providing supply chain solutions, experts in supply chain planning, with typical building blocks, segmentation, product management, demand planning, inventory planning, supply planning, executive SRP, and doing so with taking different dimensions into account, so people, process, analytics, as well as tools. So we are as what you could call a business consultant, but also a lot of our time is actually spent on implementing supply chain tools. So part of it is with our partner Arqiva. We are actually the preferred partner for Europe, where we implement this planning solution, which is indicated as a leader in the Gartner quadrants. So indeed, if you consider reviewing your planning solutions, then Arqiva is certainly one you should look at. We also have internally developed planning solutions, for example, Live, which is about leading indicator forecasting, so also very relevant during those times, but of course, not a topic for today. So that's about Solventure. Let's now go to the topic of today. Yeah. What is segmentation? I have a definition here. I'll briefly read it. It's about adapting supply chain structures, policies, processes to allow for future growth with complexity at an acceptable cost level and to differentiate across customers, products, demand to better fit with the needs and characteristics of each. A lot of words, but bottom line, it's about differentiating your supply chain across customers, products, and demand. Why? We all know that a high service is actually costing a lot of money, right? Or cash. If we give the highest service to the entire business, it would be very costly. So therefore, everybody can understand that we differentiate. It's also the case, of course, that not every customer is requiring that high service. So it's also kind of aligning towards the needs of your different customer segments. Apart from that, there is also the fact that the need for complexity, or the complexity in itself is growing, it's increasing, and segmentation is actually a way to deal with that complexity. Instead of having just one supply chain, segmentation is then helping you to having kind of 2, 3, or 4 supply chains, which allows you to make that more easy to manage as you then organize your supply chain in a different way in each of the different segments. Now, what do you do at a very high level? What you do is you map. When you start going in such a segmentation exercise, you have to understand a bit the priorities, the needs of your customers. On the other hand, you have, of course, your own supply chain and its characteristics. So you take that into account, and bringing that together allows you to define then segments, which is typically a combination of customers and products. You allocate the products and customers into your different segments to then say, okay, for those different segments, I'm going to develop what we call value propositions. And those value propositions are then differentiated across your segments and will be different typically into internal operations, and it might be into commercial approach different. Think of in terms of internal operations, typically more the field where we as supply chain are active. You could think of a planning policy, for example, make to stock with a short lead time, make to order probably with a somewhat longer lead time. In terms of a differentiated commercial approach, more in that domain, you could think about product offering, where for some segments you just offer the standard products, while for other segments you allow, for example, for customization. So this is what I explain here is a view on what I call end-to-end segmentation, meaning we are really going to consider our business and split it in how we handle the business in different ways, internally, but also externally, kind of end-to-end. That is also the way that Gartner is actually describing segmentation. In fact, they talk about 3 different types. In reality, they even talk about 5 different types, but they distinguish those 3 and have then somewhat more detail. Briefly going to explain it, they have what they call the behavior change scope. Am I focused or focused in terms of functional domain, or do I look at a broad functional area? Am I looking inside out, is the other axis, versus outside in? There, what you see is, in a lot of cases we already do, every one of us is working on unconscious segmentation. That can be as simple as just serving the one who is shouting the loudest, giving him most service. A lot of companies do that in a structured way. That we talk about targeted segmentation. That is working on optimizing a subset of your supply chain own processes. For example, I would say the ones with most impact, like planning. We might have a segmented approach for forecasting, where you do collaborative forecasting, probably for some customers, while you do bother less. We do bother less for others, and are maybe happy with statistical forecasting. Or we differentiate them towards our order promising. So that is about targeted segmentation, taking a subset of your processes and differentiate there between different customers / products. While indeed end-to-end segmentation is then really impacting the entire supply chain, sometimes even outside of the company, even the whole value chain. You could think of companies where they maybe even design their supply chain network in a different way for different segments. Think of companies like procuring the standard products in low-cost countries, so with a longer lead time, versus the more innovative products then closer to the market, so that they can react faster to changes into the customer needs. Of course, if they change their supply chain network, probably also their inventory strategy will be different across the different segments, order execution will be different, customer service will be different, and so on. That is end-to-end, broad, and aligned to the different needs of your customers. And Gartner is even talking about an extreme case, and they call it supply chain as a service architecture, where it's really about a modern service portfolio independent of the organizational structure or asset ownership. It's working as independent building blocks. I would say that's more a dream than it is reality. And that's also what they, how they consider it into their hype cycle. Just wanted to share that with you so that you have an idea and compare to where you are yourself as a company. What they say is targeted supply chain segmentation is into that slope of alignment. A lot of companies are working on that. If not yet implemented, they are taking big steps. That is different for end-to-end supply chain segmentation that did pass the peak of inflated expectations. So it's not anymore like blockchain, for example. So yes, leaders in supply chain are there, are working on that, have that working, but certainly not. It's not average to have that working. And indeed, the architecture, service architecture, that's still only in as an innovation trigger. This is the one of 2018. The last one is the one of last year. Just for your info, Gartner wanted to keep it a bit more simple, and they now grouped the segmentation interestingly, and they positioned it into the middle here. So just to make it a bit more clear, I wanted to give you a view based on a case. So it's a case I worked on myself. I'll first share a couple of analyses, or just one, I believe, just one analysis on allowing you to assess the different characteristics to get an idea about how to cluster the business. So just one example. Think of the following, where we grouped the different SKUs in the products based on two characteristics, being what is the frequency of demand, so the number of months with demand, and the volume, the horizontal axis. What you see is that I have quite a number of products here on the back, where I have my arrow, 63 SKUs, but they represent 80% of the volume. That was the main business of the company. We talk about a sugar company in a B2B context, food B2B, where this is talking about commoditized business, plain sugar, standard sugar. They also have a lot of SKUs, more SKUs, which are then delivered with a smaller quantity. This is actually indicated by number of pallets. Typically, this huge number of SKUs is delivered in quantity less than a pallet, and those are delivered frequently. A couple of them, a lot of them are also delivered infrequently. What you see, this is really a different piece of their business. It's about value-added products, typically customized recipes of sugar, which are delivered in quantities less than a pallet to a different type of customers. And you will also see they have then very lumpy demand for a couple of products too. Just to see that indeed, you do, based on some basic analysis, you can already distinguish different kind of characteristic, different flows of business. And also, I would say, identify whether the company is behaving in a different way or behaving as you would expect for these different characteristics. For example, here we analyzed that for those where we assessed whether indeed for the SKUs we have an infrequent demand and then a very lumpy quantity, high quantities but infrequently, you would expect that those are truly made to order. In this case, that was certainly not always the case. So analysis to identify different characteristics and see whether the company is behaving different for those different characteristics. Out of those analysis, we then identified a number of segments, and what you see now on this slide is actually the resulting segmentation. What you see is that we identified one segment which we call the steady flow, which is commodity products, high volume for large and medium customers. Think of Coca-Cola ordering a limited number of SKUs, standard in huge quantities, bulk wagons. They want a low cost, those huge volumes at low cost, really looking for operational efficiency. That's one type of business. Another segment is this gold service, where we identified large and medium customers for those products which were value added. So think of SKUs with a specific recipe, and typically then here in high volume for the gold service. Think of Starbucks. Starbucks, large customer requiring high volumes, but not a commodity. They want their own specific sugar to offer. Now they want service. They are not looking for operational efficiency. They want different, broader portfolio. They want specific customized recipes. They want delivery and volume flexibility, very different from what you have as into the steady flow. And there is another segment here which is more playing on flexibility, where the portfolio is even much broader, and talking about lower volume value-added SKUs. We also identified what we call the supporting segment, which is a lot of their customers were actually into those characteristics, but we identified it indeed as to manage, because those are certainly not the future. Why? You could imagine low volume commodity. Low volume commodity SKUs are never going to be an efficient business model. So there we said, manage that in a different way and try to move that away from your own business model, your own order handling, kind of try to push that, for example, towards distributors who can handle that probably in a more efficient way than you would do. I think in general that is wise to do if you talk about segmentation, to also be explicit about who you want to serve in a different way, but also maybe identify pieces of the business where you say, this is not my future. I'm going to skip these. These are the different figures behind. And then maybe briefly mention this playbook, because what is this indicating? This indicates, yes, for each of the segments, you then have to identify how do you serve those segments in a different way. Like for the steady flow, think of the Coca-Cola. I can offer products, portfolio. I do want to kind of customize a bit, but it will never be the recipe. It might be that just I change the artwork. I might want to change the palletization, but that's it, not the recipe. I do want to go for food pallets, probably, maybe even food trucks. And whenever I do something specific, I do charge for that. I do have a surcharge. We call that actually a naked offering. And what we offer there is a naked offering, so that the customer is just paying for what he is asking for. Whatever he is asking a bit more, he will pay for that. Is that an issue for the customer? Typically not, because the guy behaving like that, he also understands that he is not paying for what he did not ask for. We would call it the Ryanair model also, where you say just naked offering, steady flow, operational excellence. While of course, as indicated, this is very different in other ways, like in the flexible growth segment. Here, for example, we would say we even allow for overcapacity, while for steady flow, it's all about OEE into the operations. Into the flexible growth, we would talk about allowing and even planning for overcapacity, so that we can serve the make-to-order product, which would not exist in a steady flow. But in flexible growth, we want to serve make-to-order, still allow for an acceptable lead time, therefore we do have overcapacity, but of course our margins will be very different into this flexible growth. I skipped it, but into the figures here you would see flexible growth is only 3% of the volume. It's contributing to 13% of the margin, while the steady flow was 2/3 of the volume, but only contributing to 1/3 of the overall margin. So what I wanted to demonstrate is just a case where you see an example of an end-to-end segmentation. You try to identify clusters of your business which have similar characteristics, similar needs, and over your value chain, you define playbooks. You define how you're going to differentiate across the segments. I just wanted to give one last example of this case, as it is sometimes interesting to look for a driver of change. For this company, the sugar company, we were lucky to have a capacity constraint situation, so they had bottlenecks. Now that's always helping in segmentation because it's forcing the organization to think about priorities. We have a limited capacity. Who are we going to use the capacity for? Now, in order to help that reflection, we expressed the different SKUs on this graph, where we plot them against how much capacity do they need, do they require, and then what is their contribution to the margin per hour of used capacity. And of course, you can only sell your capacity once. So what does that mean? If I have 1 hour of capacity, what do I prefer? Do I prefer to plan this SKU, which brings me 350 euro for 1 hour? Or do I plan this SKU, which is only bringing me 50 euro an hour? That way, bringing it that way, you can help your organization think about, how am I going to set priorities? What is now crucial and what not? And actually, this way of thinking was then used into their S&OP. And so when planning for the capacity of this bottleneck, they're going to map actually the SKUs per segment and then rank in a certain order to say, okay, do I want to extend, for example, add number of shifts? I might do so, but I'm not going to add number of shifts. Is that only to serve my complexity, my managed complexity, that last segment, which I tried to avoid. Okay, just giving you an overview of a short case into this end-to-end segmentation. The question for you is then actually, how many supply chains do you have? Do you believe you have just one supply chain? Do you believe you actually in reality have maybe 2 or 3 supply chains, and you could even segment your ways of treating your customers and your products in a different way? I think the good news now is that there is more need for segmentation, as expressed because there is more complexity. There's a higher differentiation of need also. But the good news is also that tools are more equipped than before to handle that complexity. We see the same, by the way, in Archiva, where you're equipped actually to differentiate the way we handle, the way we plan, based on the different segments. Then, segmentation in Corona times. What I talked about was end-to-end segmentation, which is not always an easy process. You could think about a process of probably a year to have that reasonably started, but there are other ways. And I think when we are talking about Corona times, we should think about other ways, because we are now in stress. I think as supply chain managers, we are already into a conflict every day. Typically, we talk about this supply chain triangle where there is that tension between, on the one hand, the service. We want the highest service, certainly sales will be owing that. We want to do that at the lowest cost possible. VP operations and purchasing will also own that part. And of course, we want to do that in the most cash efficient way, where our CFO will also push for that. We'd like to think that we as supply chain are kind of helping to orchestrate that tension between those three dimensions to have that in control and balanced. Now, whether that is typically already a challenge, what we see now in Corona is that it is challenged much more even, be that companies which are, for example, serving toilet paper, which are not able to or were not able to serve all the demands from the retail. OTIF certainly not looking good. Or it could be into the cash, where today there was in the news that Airbus and Hertz, two big companies, are really onto the can only survive, let me say it that way, if they are granted huge loans from the government or from banks. Otherwise they will go bankrupt. So, and of course, some other companies are really stressed more from a cost perspective, as indeed, for example, they need to supply raw materials out of China, when normally they do that maybe out of Europe, because China is already a bit in ongoing business, rather than here, where a lot of the manufacturing companies are still closed. So we are in stress. I think we can all say that our resources are scarce, so there is more need for segmentation, even more need for priority setting than there is in a regular business mode. Now then the question becomes how to react. The question is then double. First question is, who do I serve with priority? Because I only have a limited inventory, I have a limited capacity available. And then the question is also, what service do I provide? Now, we do not have a magic formula. We only have a couple of guidelines. And one of the guidelines I believe we should all have is that we do want to serve the customers now who we see as a customer into the long run, into the future. I think that's the first one to keep in mind. Second, it's good to see the crisis as a test of the strategy. And what does that mean? For example, if we believe we have a segment in terms of operational efficiency, the operational excellence, I mean, we should question whether we want to serve that segment via shipping out of China and take the additional cost. Maybe we want to give them priority to, in the case I described before, to the one which is the flexibility segment, which is more paying for that flexibility. Also, I think it's important to question whether we want to still deliver the same service as before into this crisis mode. I see, for example, there was also an article in the Wall Street Journal reflecting that a lot of companies are more going towards standard products now. They consider to offer the standard products more than the customized, so that they can reduce the number of changeovers, increase the efficiency, so that we have at an acceptable cost still maximized output. And indeed, you can question what service do I provide, or customers might be happy that they still have a product, even if it's not the typical one they have, it's a standard product. Well, maybe they normally have customized, but maybe they prefer in that way rather than not having any delivery at all. Now, I'm going to present now as it links to Corona. We had a couple of questions of people who related to segmentation, and where we have is offering a quite basic way of segmenting your business. I'm going to go through it to give you an idea about relatively easy, pragmatic ways of segmenting your business, which is not costing you a year, which you can be implemented in a couple of weeks to at least say, okay, how do I manage my business in crisis mode? What can I do in a pragmatic way to still differentiate across my different customers and products? You will see I differentiate and I'll take 6 steps into the approach. We'll first talk about customer segmentation, segmenting products, how we will differentiate across the segments. We'll simulate the impact, we will follow up the benefits, and we'll have a word on how to adapt that over time. I see I don't have too much time, so I'll go a bit quick over it, but I believe we can still make it. So customer segmentation, as I mentioned, there are pragmatic ways, and what we believe and see is that indeed using this rule ABC and combining a Pareto classification on volume with a Pareto classification on margin is already a good way to start, so that you say, look, my A customers are typically then those which have a high or medium volume combined with a high or a medium margin. Those are A, and for example, C would be the ones with low volume combined with low margin. It's not needed to have 100% of your segment allocated based on this logic. What we see is that if you can do 90% of your allocation based on logic, then you do the rest via a more qualitative assessment. That's fine too. It helps also to have your sales on board, right, so that they can also upgrade or downgrade customers across the different segments. I believe, or at least we have the experience, that it is crucial to have your segmentation accepted into the organization. A very basic way of segmenting your customers. A basic way to segment your product is actually the model which is combining a strategic fit with operational fit, where strategic fit is then indicating, okay, if I now look into the future, what is working for me in the long run, where do maybe I expect to have more demand with an acceptable or very good margin, where is my competitive positioning going to evolve? So that is the strategic fit, where of course you also need the operational fit to assess for a product, is it relatively easy to produce, or the changeover times acceptable, and so on. So where, again here, using those two, you would have a matrix where combining a high operational fit with a strategic fit would then result into A products, and C products would then be the ones with a low operational fit and then low strategic. Having those two combined gives already a nice starting point to then start differentiating the way you interact with your customers, and doing so in a different way, maybe for different products. The question then becomes, how am I going to differentiate? In our logic, we do that typically via brainstorming, involving a couple of different departments, supply chain, but certainly also sales themselves, customer service, categorizing them into different blocks, and from there start building those playbooks. One example could be ordering logistics. Differentiating could be, do I allow less than a pallet, yes or no? Do I foresee specific delivery windows? Do I allow multi-drops? And so on. Important thereby is that you reflect whether you want to offer the service standard, no surcharge, whether you want to offer it but with a surcharge, or not even offer the option, the service option for a specific segment. Again, also look from a customer perspective, how will he perceive the offering? At least when he has a surcharge, he has a choice. If I'm surcharged for a short lead time, next time maybe I wonder whether I need that short lead time anyhow. So surcharging is also helping you to have your customer reflect. The question is what framework can I use to help me differentiate the services across the segments? What we see being useful is this Kano model, where we distinguish between the qualifiers, kind of characteristics you need anyhow as an entry barrier to make it into the business. I need a certain quality, a certain shelf life. Others are performance features, for example, lead time, where the impact is such that whenever I increase my performance features, the more I increase it, the more impact I will have on my volume and my profits. Increasing my OTIF, for example, in a certain business, might lead to more business. Really decreasing it might see an effect on the volume I can get out of the market. And then you have excitement parameters, where you see that even not offering excitement parameters is not going to impact drastically your business, but whenever you have those, it can allow you to take a nice surplus. Think about customer-specific packaging or so on. Now, using that framework, it could be like having the qualifiers for each of your segments, basic offering. The performance would be used to really differentiate. That is the main characteristic to say, probably have to offer it for all, right? But the high performance is just for my A customers and products, while the low performance is for my C's. And then the excitement parameters are probably only for my top products and top customers. Important is then to take the time to simulate the impact. What you see here is an example of a steel company where we worked on that, where we assessed, together also with sales, operations and supply chain, what could be the optimistic scenario in terms of volume and margin impact versus a pessimistic scenario, again, on volume and margin. And then how is that in total impacting our volume, margin, relative and absolute, and also inventory. The interesting thing was that those discussions led in the end to also the conservative scenario being a very positive one, because also here, even by losing volume in the conservative scenario, we would still increase the margin. But still, we believe it's a critical step into the process, so to take everyone on board. Of course, an important one is to monitor the whole impact across the whole cycle here of S&OP. So yeah, it will be about your product portfolio. It can be about how you differentiate and you monitor your forecasting, about your inventory, where you will see the effect probably on your C products. Of course, your supply plan, where you give priority to your A and B customers, and so on. So monitor the effect. Then we often get the question, when are we finished? The answer is, till you feel it's right. And the main guidance here is be pragmatic. Do not try to be perfect. Start, reflect on your business, and from there, you might already be able to realize a nice effect both into your top line as well as an impact on your bottom line. And it does not need to take months to start. What is important, apart from this being pragmatic, is having the right people on board, and that is from two perspectives. That is from a cross-functional perspective. I think their operations, supply chain, and sales are the crucial players. That's one. Second is to have the C-level involved, because indeed we are going to impact the business, and so we do need even typically the CEO to have his approval, or even have him as a sponsor of such the segmentation project. And then I believe that's my last remark. Be flexible in over time. And that means a segmentation is never finished. So recalculate it at least once every year. Revise it typically during the budgeting process, so that indeed it becomes rather a process than it is a project. So to conclude, we believe in uncertain times like we live in today. There is more need for priority setting, so just for segmentation. In segmentation, we have very different ways to look at things. The extreme is more an end-to-end segmentation. I gave you an example how that can look like. I also talked about the other extreme, a very targeted, pragmatic approach, where you can start just in a couple of weeks to already see the benefits coming in sooner. Voila, this is the messages I wanted to bring. So we do have a couple of minutes left for questions. One of the questions here is, where do you start? Where do you start? Good question. I would start with looking, ideally, reflect on the example of the bottleneck case. Ideally, you can assess a situation where you have a conflict for resources. If you have that case, I think that's the best case you can have to start a discussion and to start with brainstorming on how you can handle that situation and how you would handle it now and what could be ways to handle it into the future. Having that discussion with the different players around the table, the player about the triangle at service, cost, and cash, that is, I think, a great start to identify the actual way on how it is treated, and to already have some ideas on potential criteria to be used for the future segmentation. We may be profitable for a customer in some product, but not in others. We create certain products at certain plans. I see here as a remark, yes, and of course, that is the case, that the customer have different products, and indeed he is profitable for ones and not for others. Typically, you will want to look at those both characteristics, where at the customer level, you will look a bit more into needs and outside in, but you will look at the total portfolio of that customer, while from a product perspective, when you look at segmentation, it's more inside out. You try to be cost efficient and you differentiate your segments based also on that. As mentioned, with those two dimensions, also the marketing view or the strategic fit. But indeed, there is no problem to have a customer having a negative margin on some products while he is creating margin at others. I think look at a customer as a total, and that segmentation at the customer level will help. Yes, we do have some philosophical questions here. My sales organization thinks everything is priority and every order should be treated as a priority. Yeah, that is a remark we see coming back as the start of this segmentation, right? I think it's just the reason why we do that is to handle our resources in a much more organized way, to have kind of a framework to take those decisions indeed in a structured way. I think I handled a couple of questions. So I hope this was helpful to you. It was meaningful. I wish you all the best in taking steps in this journey, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you.